This is the Paul Robeson Archives office. It was established in 1973 to collect and organize all of the available information on the late Paul Robeson. The prime responsibility for cataloging this sea of documents, writings, music scores, photographs, books, recordings, and film lies in the hands of his son, Paul Robeson, Jr. His is a truly singular task and a most difficult one, because there is so much material to gather from all over the world. It is also a labor of love. This documentary film is about the life of Paul Robeson. It was begun several months before he passed away in January of 1976. Much of the visual material came from this archive. Many hours were spent here poring over the material on this unusual man. There has unfolded the story of a man of prodigious abilities, and not just in drama, film, singing, and sports, but in scholarship, profoundly so. And also, there has emerged the story of a man of extraordinary principle who refused to bend even 1 inch away from his convictions, no matter what the price. This, then, is the extraordinary story of an extraordinary man, Paul Robeson.
We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We are climbing Jacob's ladder. We're soldiers in this fight. I started as an actor, you know, as an artist in the Provincetown Theater with Mr. Eugene O'Neil way back in the 20s. I did The Emperor Jones, and August Children Got Wings with the distinguished, I did in London with the distinguished English actress Paul Robeson years ago. I came over way back in 1922. And not only came over, but had the privilege and great pleasure of playing a whole summer with Mrs. Patrick Campbell in the play, which was about the Negro South and then going back to Africa. I was to be some kind of a chieftain. I fall asleep at the end of the first act, and sort of in a dream, I sort of fall asleep as opposed to I whistle and being very gay, and before you know it, I'm back in Africa. And I tried my best falling asleep to whistle, and I still can't whistle, as you can hear me right now. I just can't whistle to this day. And so I broke out into a sort of a, Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go, to a very beautiful spiritual that I remembered as a child. And as I sort of hummed this, I heard a voice from the wings, sing it louder, sing it louder, as if it were a part of the play. And Miss Wyborg finally saw the play later in the week in Liverpool. The play had really turned into a musical. Luckily for me, I got very nice reviews from it and found out that I was a singer. Finally went, I remember, to study with Madame Chern-René, a great singer at Juilliard, a great singing teacher. But it was very clear to me, even in those days, that I wanted to be a singer of the folk songs of my people. And I did not want to become a Wagnerian opera singer, because I wanted my voice to come from inside me.
I first met that great artist, kind, generous, and gentle man, Paul Robeson, in 1922 in London. I never realized then that I would pay for him.
Dear Larry, one of the great authorities on our folk music, and one of the great arrangers of our folk songs, just a master of the rhythm of our music, and our early programs, which more or less for 5 years were devoted specifically to the folk song of our own people.
It was a mere accident. I met him on the corner of 135th Street and 7th Avenue in March 1925. And he asked me, say, what are you doing tonight? I said, I'm not doing anything. He says, will you go down into the village with me? James Light, who had directed him in the Emperor Jones and in all God's Children, both O'Neil plays. And so we went down in the village, and by sheer accident, he decided to sing some of my arrangements, which I had arranged in London, and I happened to join in with him. And James Light was so excited, he said, "You two guys give a program together." He says, "I can arrange it for you at the Greenwich Village Theater." Well, that's the way it happened. We were frightened to death.
Now my soul is a witness. Yes, my soul is a witness.
Music critics were overwhelmed. One said that Robeson had a voice in which deep bells rang. Out of Paul Robeson rolled the rich heritage of his church experience with his beloved father, the Reverend William Drew Robeson, with whom he was especially close.
And my father was in that tradition. Every Sunday morning, it would be a rolling out of a great sermon, and now we bow down on bended knee, oh Lord. And it became like an opera.
Samson, we know, the Holy Bible tells us so. Shaved off his head just as clean as your hand. Strength became just like any other man. Now that's another witness. Yes, that's another witness. Oh, that's another witness. Yes, that's another witness.
I was quite astonished that people were willing to come and pay to hear me sing Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, and Nobody Knows the Trouble I See, which I had just sung in church.
I think his interest in folk song is the fact that he has a great love for human beings and for humanity, I would say. Therefore, he wanted to sing the songs of the folk, the ordinary person, perhaps the peasant, or even the downtrodden.
It was awesome. It was constant. It wasn't just into the centers of literary material. Wherever he went in the country, I don't care what country he was in, he found himself among the artists, he found himself among the people who sang songs or sang chants. He constantly wanted to know what everything meant. He wanted to know where it all came from. And then pretty soon, this enormous cranium of his, this genius that housed, this head that housed so much genius, he would go to Czechoslovakia, or he'd go to the Soviet Union, or he'd go to England, or whatever, and he would hear a song. And he would immediately translate that song to something that had to do with a tribe in Africa. Or hear a melody somewhere in Africa, and he would remember that he heard it being sung by the Welsh miners. Then he'd want to know how the hell did it all get there? Did the sailors bring it? Was it just a coincidence? What has been going on in this byway of life? And he sang in almost every language. He spoke many languages, but phonetically, those languages he didn't speak, he was able to learn phonetically and learn them meticulously. He was conscious about the highest form of the art, and he didn't want to be just an American singing a song of someone in another country. He wanted to get the nuances. He wanted to get the absolute. He wanted the people, when they heard him sing it, for them to assume that he came from that part of Ireland, that part of Wales, that part of Germany. So and he drove me crazy, because having set this standard, I then said, well, that's the only way to really find out what a song is all about. You got to get into that.
Well, I've gone from my own songs to the songs of many peoples of the world. Songs that I find very similar to my own, incidentally. All the folk music of the world might interest you are very similar in one respect. Not only because peoples have the same aspirations and feelings, but even technically use the same scales. One scale of our music, which is predominant, is a so-called 5-tone scale, sort of a big word for it, pentatonic. That can be played on the 5 black keys of the piano, which form a natural 5-tone scale. And, for example, 2 groups of songs, mostly in this scale, and very similar to my own, are Chinese folk songs and Scotch Hebridean folk songs. C in D flat. And extremely interesting again will be what we call the disjunct form. In F. Let's take the conjunct form, which would begin with the say the 4th on B flat. The study of the Negro Spiritual has now characterizes my programs, which most of the critics have characterized as a program showing the unity, the relation of Negro music to all the music of the world. For example, in my programs, I start with an old English song like Over the Mountains. Over the mountains and over the waves, under the fountains and under the graves, under floods that are deepest, which Neptune obey, over rocks that are steepest, love will find out the way. Very nice idea, as a matter of fact.
Very nice.
So the idea of my concert is one suggestion that all men are brothers because of their music. And in my first group, I do an old English song. I do an old song from about the 11th or 12th century from Czechoslovakia. The Moravian chorales of about the 13th, 11th, and 12th centuries preceded the chorales upon which Johann Sebastian Bach based his music. So I take this, and then I do a Bach chorale, and then I create a slight confusion by doing a Negro Spiritual right in the middle, because it belongs there. And I found that out by going back to Africa. For example, there was an old, in East Africa, there is a chorale form that reached a form just pre-Bach in Europe. Very interesting. Chabala chapataye, chabala pataye, chabala patapataye, chabala pataye, mzungu mzungu wachine, mzungu mzungu wachine. Svati Vatsklavе, Vivedo Česky zemlje. The first was African, almost, and you say they're very similar. The first was African. The second is from the 11th century in Czechoslovakia with a chorale that just preceded Bach.
And so a young and magnificently gifted Paul Robeson was on his way in a career that would make him the best-known man in the world within 15 years. Paul Robeson, the son of a preacher who was once a slave. Paul Robeson, who grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and from the very start exhibited the promise of greatness. Everyone in town, his neighbors, teachers, classmates, just knew that Paul was going to be somebody. But who would have guessed how much of a somebody he'd become? He was always big for his age, but as fast and agile as a cat. He was always involved in some sport or another, right through these early school days. Then as he entered college, his body began to really develop. And so did his mind, staggeringly so. He was a near-perfect student. He attended Rutgers College on a scholarship. From 1915 through 1919, he amassed Phi Beta Kappa honors. He was elected to the Cap and Skull Society, was debating champion, and was valedictorian of his graduating class. And bear in mind that the racist climate in America was never more intense. Robeson didn't fit into the typical bookworm mold. He now stood well over 6 feet and had muscles for days. He took that magnificent physique and he used it to win himself 13 varsity letters. However, he wasn't exactly welcomed with open arms by his fellow students. He was barred from singing in the campus glee club, and when he tried out for the football team, his teammates broke his nose and deliberately stomped on his hand, tearing every fingernail off of his hand. Years later, the memory still lingered. He became one of the greatest football players of all time. A great pass receiver, overwhelming offensive blocker, tackle, and the best defensive linebacker of his era. He was Rutgers University's first All-America football player. sports headlines of the day tell it like it was. As great as he was, however, Paul Robeson was not great enough to be listed in the College Football Hall of Fame, even though the hall was at one time located right on the Rutgers campus. When he graduated Rutgers with highest academic honors, he enrolled in the Columbia University Law School. The campus overlooked Harlem, where he moved into an apartment. Here, the relatively unworldly young law student was exposed to a Harlem that was in the midst of its fabulous Renaissance era. It all had its impact on Paul. Politically, the Marcus Garvey African Nationalist Movement, with a following of tens of thousands, emphasized Africanness for Afro Americans. It was in full swing. And then culturally, artists like Duke Ellington had become a regular at the Cotton Club. Duke's early compositions also stressed Africanness. In the field of education, Harlem proffered the intellect of W.E.B. Du Bois. In short, Harlem was booming with activity, and young Paul Robeson, fresh out of quiet New Jersey, drank it all in. Conversely, Harlem threw her arms wide open to him. He was drawn into film acting in the black-produced film of Oscar Micheaux. He was also invited to sing with a number of groups. On weekends, football, all this while doing brilliantly at Columbia Law School. Oh, and by the way, he managed to find time to fall in love and marry a striking young anthropologist, Eslanda Cardoza Good. He graduated Columbia with his law degree, but he met bias in the law firm he was working for and eventually quit the profession of law. Young Paul Robeson set his sights elsewhere. Armed with talent, brain, brawn, a brilliant and talented wife at his side, Paul Robeson was ready to take on the world. But was the world ready for him? In